Hi, my name's Celestine, and 3 weeks ago, I mailed a box of secrets that set an entire family on fire. I wasn't brave. I wasn't ready. But when you hear your sister's voice crack over the phone and realize she's hiding bruises from a man wearing a badge, you stop waiting for permission to do something crazy. Now, listen carefully, because this is where it all began. The drizzle started before I reached her street, fine needles of rain tracing thin lines across the windshield. The sky looked bruised, swollen with unspent thunder. I sat in the car longer than I should have, listening to the quiet hum of the engine and my own hesitation. I hadn't planned this visit. My hands moved on their own, steering me toward her house, toward something I didn't yet have words for. When I finally stepped out, the air was cool and heavy. Leaves clung wet to the pavement. Narina's porch light glowed like a small promise, the kind that always meant comfort when we were young. I knocked once, twice. The door opened too fast. She looked perfect. Lipstick soft pink, hair pinned the way Mom always liked, sweater sleeves pulled far past her wrists. She smiled as if she'd rehearsed it. "Celestine. You didn't tell me you were coming." "I know," I said quietly. "I just felt like it." The house smelled of cinnamon and lemon wax, too much of both. Music played low, the kind used to fill silence rather than enjoy it. I noticed the fireplace was uneven, though it wasn't cold enough for it. The heat felt staged, like everything else here. She busied herself pouring tea. The porcelain cups clicked gently against their saucers, a rhythm that felt too precise. And then it happened, her sleeve slipped. Just for a heartbeat, maybe two. A bruise, deep violet, curved around her elbow like someone's grip turned to color. She froze, then tugged the fabric back down. "Damn cabinet door," she murmured, "too bright, too quick." I didn't answer. The smell of overbrewed tea filled the room. My heart thudded slow and heavy, counting the silence between us. We sat in the living room where the photos of her wedding still hung. The one of Deacon in uniform, hand on her waist, smile stretched thin. I used to think that was pride. Now it looked like ownership. She talked about small things, Unia's school, the new grocery store, how busy Deacon's shifts were. Each word sounded carefully chosen, like walking through glass barefoot. When I finally left, she hugged me tighter than she used to. Her body trembled, just once. I almost asked, but the way her eyes flicked to the corner security camera stopped me. That evening, dinner with Mom felt like stepping into a script I'd forgotten the lines to. The same dining table, the same smell of pot roast, the same sharpness in her tone. I told her what I saw. She said it was a cabinet door. Mom interrupted, not looking up from her plate. "It didn't look like Celestine." She sighed. "Your sister is married to a police officer, not a monster. You always think the worst of people. That's your problem." Her knife scraped against the china. "Don't make trouble for her." I swallowed the words sitting on my tongue. Trouble. That's what I'd always been. That night, in my old bedroom, now a guest room with floral sheets that didn't belong to me, I couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but the sound of it clung to the windows in memory. I opened the storage box under the bed and found my old journal, the one with the bent spine. The ink had faded, but the words hadn't lost their sting. If I speak, I'm difficult. If I'm quiet, I'm guilty. I remembered the first time no one believed me. A teacher's hand on my shoulder too long, my voice swallowed by adults who said, "Don't make a scene, Celestine." I had learned early how silence can sound like peace. Now I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, the fan blades slicing the dim light into slow rotations. Down the hall, Mom's television murmured, a low, endless hum of distraction. I thought of Narina's sleeve, the way she flinched, the way her eyes darted to the camera. My stomach tightened, that old ache that came whenever I saw someone trying too hard to look fine. They didn't ignore me back then. They erased me. And now, I could see them doing the same to her. My phone glowed beside me. Her name sat on the screen, waiting. My thumb hovered over it, but I didn't call. What could I say? That I saw the truth and pretended not to? That I recognized the fear in her because it used to live in me? The clock ticked past midnight. The house settled, making the kind of creaks that sound like whispers when you're half awake. I turned on my side, eyes open, breath steady. "I won't let it happen again," I whispered softly to no one. Not to her. The promise settled deep, gentle but sure, like something I hadn't known I'd been carrying for years. I learned quietly, slowly, gently in ways they never imagined. And I couldn't unsee it anymore. No matter how brightly the room glowed, no matter how many candles flickered across the table or how carefully the china gleamed beneath the light, I knew what I was looking at. A performance. A table full of people playing parts they'd memorized so long ago, they couldn't even hear the silence underneath. We were gathered for Dad's birthday. The house was crowded, too many voices talking over each other, too many forks clinking against porcelain, too many drinks poured by hands that wouldn't hold you when you cried. I stood near the edge of the dining room, holding a glass of water I didn't want. It kept my hands busy. My eyes were already busy, watching. Narina entered from the kitchen, smiling like someone had dared her not to. Her dress was long-sleeved and high-necked, far too warm for this early fall night, and her movements were careful, controlled the way dancers are when they're injured but still performing. Then Deacon stepped in behind her. Smiling. One hand on her lower back, possessive but soft enough to look polite. He kissed the top of her head and said, "You look amazing, baby," loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice was made for these rooms, charming, practiced, just rehearsed enough to be bulletproof. During the toast, Deacon stood and said all the right things. About family, about loyalty, about how lucky we are to love each other, even when things get messy. I watched as he placed his hand on Narina's shoulder, the way someone might rest their palm on a trophy. She flinched. It was subtle. Barely a twitch. But I saw it. And then her smile stretched wider, too wide, and her fingers wrapped tighter around her napkin. Not in the way people do when they're happy. In the way people do when they're trying to keep something inside. "We're so lucky to have him," Mom said loudly from across the table. "Deacon's the kind of man you pray your daughter marries. Strong. Loyal. Reliable." There were nods around the table, clinks of glasses, murmurs of agreement. But I kept my eyes on Narina. Her lips moved to form "thank you," but her eyes flicked to mine, then away again. Unia slipped beside me sometime after dessert. Her small fingers wrapped around a piece of folded paper. "Mom said I could draw while the grown-ups talk," she whispered. "Wanna see?" I nodded and knelt beside her. She handed me the paper. Crayons. Purple, red, black. A big figure, arms raised. A smaller figure curled in the corner. Scribbled lines above them, thunder? Shouting? "He was yelling again," Unia said quietly. "But Mommy said I had to draw something nice." My breath stalled. My fingers traced the lines without touching them. I folded the paper slowly, gently, as if it might scream if I moved too fast. When I looked up, Deacon was watching us from across the room. His expression was unreadable, but not unaware. Unia pressed her cheek to my arm and whispered, "Do you like it?" I nodded. "Very much." After the cake, as people gathered to sing again, Mom stood and cleared her throat. "I just want to say something real quick," she began. "About Deacon." My stomach tightened. "He's brought something to this family that we didn't know we were missing. Stability. Strength. God knew we needed a man like you, Deacon." The room clapped. Light applause. Smiles. Narina's expression didn't shift, but her hands trembled slightly as she cut the second slice of cake. I sat back, the drawing still in my purse. My fingers pressed against the soft leather, not moving, not letting go. They see what they want. I see what she's hiding. I didn't say anything. Not yet. But the silence didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like complicity. As the evening wore down, I walked into the hallway alone, letting the noise fall behind me like a coat I didn't want to wear. I leaned against the wall, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe through the ache building in my chest. The kind of ache that doesn't come from sadness, but from knowing the truth and having no room to speak it. I thought about when we were kids, how Narina used to cover for me when I broke things. How I used to take the blame when she cried too hard and didn't want to talk. We were always cleaning up each other's messes, even when the mess wasn't ours. But now, her mess was turning into a wound she couldn't bandage. And mine was turning into something I couldn't unsee. I opened my eyes and looked into the mirror at the end of the hallway. My reflection looked older. Not just by years. By memory. Quietly, softly, I whispered to the glass, "Don't let her disappear." The house behind me laughed and toasted and poured wine. But I stood still, one hand in my purse, feeling the drawing like it was made of bone. The laughter from that night still clung to my hair when I woke the next morning. It felt like perfume that wouldn't wash off. I couldn't forget the look Narina gave me, the way her smile trembled before it hardened again. Something in her was dying quietly, and everyone else was pretending not to hear the sound. That evening, I stopped by her house again to drop off the gift I'd forgotten. I told myself it was just an excuse. I needed to see her eyes without the lights, without the crowd. The house was dark except for the glow spilling through the blinds. I knocked once and heard nothing. The front door wasn't locked, so I stepped inside. The air felt stale. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. From the back patio came a voice, low, calm, steady. I followed it. Through the glass door, I saw Deacon outside, phone pressed to his ear, pacing. "She keeps digging," he said. "I told you I'd handle her." A pause. Then softer, "No, she won't be a problem. Not anymore." My pulse beat behind my eyes. I moved back, pressing my back against the wall. The call ended. He turned, his reflection slicing through the glass. He was smiling again, the kind of smile that made you doubt what you'd just heard. He came inside, placed his keys on the counter, and kissed Narina's cheek as if the air hadn't just frozen around him. I left before he saw me. My hands shook on the steering wheel all the way home. I parked in my driveway, sat there in the dark, and thought about his words. Handle her. By morning, I had decided to test something. I went downtown, to the 14th precinct. The sign outside was cracked, but the flag above it still waved steady, proud. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A man at the front desk looked up, bored already. "Hi," I started, keeping my voice even. "I'd like to report a concern about Officer Deacon Mitchell." He raised his brows, chewing gum slowly. "Mitchell? You sure about that?" "Yes. It's about domestic abuse." He leaned back in his chair. "Lady, do you know how many people come in here trying to ruin a cop's life because of some family drama? He's decorated. Solid guy. Maybe your sister's just sensitive." His smirk made something in me twist. "Sensitive," I repeated. He shrugged. "You know how women can be. You sure you want to make that kind of claim? It won't go far without proof." Proof. The word followed me out the door, down the steps, and into the wind. I wanted to scream it. I didn't. I just kept walking until I reached my car. My fingers were numb from the cold, or maybe from rage. That night, I called a legal aid center. A woman answered with a voice that sounded too young to know exhaustion. I told her everything, my sister, the bruises, the fear. She was polite, her words measured. "Without hard evidence," she said, "there's not much we can do." "I'm sorry." "Not much," I repeated quietly. She hesitated. "You're doing the right thing trying to help her. But if she won't file a report, our hands are tied." I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the wall. The silence in my apartment was thick. Even the walls seemed to breathe slower. I walked to the kitchen, made coffee I wouldn't drink, and leaned on the counter until it went cold. Sometimes you can almost hear defeat. It doesn't shout. It hums, steady, beneath the surface, until you can't tell if it's outside you or inside. When I finally stepped outside, the air cut clean across my cheeks. The sky was the kind of blue that hurts to look at. Cars passed, people hurried, life continued like justice was just another story people told to make sense of the world. At the red light, I saw a billboard with a smiling cop and the words integrity, service, courage. I laughed softly, not because it was funny but because it was so painfully absurd. By the time I reached home, night had fallen again. My phone buzzed once, Mom's name flashing on the screen. I let it ring. She'd ask if I'd dropped it already, as if concern were something you could just set down. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my cup. The bruise. The drawing. The silence. They stacked together like a puzzle only I seemed willing to finish. My heart hurt in a way that wasn't new but felt sharper now. I thought about all the times I'd tried to speak in this family, how every word was turned into a character flaw. Dramatic. Difficult. Disrespectful. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was all those things. But I couldn't stop seeing the truth just because it made everyone else comfortable. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere down the block. The sound made me flinch. Then I laughed at myself, quietly, because fear makes fools out of the brave when no one's looking. I walked to my desk, pulled out a notebook, and started writing everything down, dates, moments, words I'd overheard. If they wanted proof, I'd build it myself. But as I wrote, I realized the hardest part wasn't collecting evidence. It was accepting how easily people believe a lie when it wears a uniform. The streetlight flickered through my window, strobing across the wall. For a second, it looked like it was breathing with me. If the law won't protect her, I whispered, closing the notebook, then maybe I have to. The words came out soft, but they didn't feel small. They felt like the first real thing I'd said in years. I turned off the lamp, grabbed my keys, and stepped into the night, ready to find out how deep this truth went. The road back to Narina's house was quiet, the kind of quiet that carries more weight than peace. I didn't know what I was looking for that night, proof, maybe, or courage. The porch light was on, faint and flickering. I let myself in with the spare key she never thought to hide better. The kitchen light glowed dimly, throwing long shadows that shifted with every breath I took. I set my bag down on the counter and glanced around. That's when I saw it, something small tucked behind the plant on the corner shelf. A faint red blink. Once. Twice. I moved closer, careful not to make a sound. Ahí din camera. Pointed straight at the breakfast table. It looked like part of the decor, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse slowing until every blink of that red light felt like a heartbeat I wanted to stop. Gently, I reached behind the leaves and removed the battery. The blinking stopped. I set the camera on the counter beside a folded napkin and scribbled a note. Your badge won't protect you from the truth. I placed it under the camera and walked out. When I returned to my apartment, the air felt thin, like the walls had been holding their breath until I came home. I poured a glass of water I didn't drink, sat on the couch, and waited for something, anything, to happen. But silence stayed, patient and heavy. Around midnight, a soft knock broke it. I opened the door to find Narina standing there, her coat half-buttoned, her face blotched and swollen. The skin beneath her left eye was purple, her lip cracked. I didn't know where else to go, she whispered. I stepped aside without a word. She sat on the couch, clutching her wrist as if trying to keep it from shaking. I'm fine, she said finally. He didn't mean to. He's just under stress. Things at work are rough. Rough? I echoed. She looked down. You don't understand how it is with him. When he's good, he's really good. He loses it sometimes. But he always says sorry. I sat beside her. The smell of her perfume was faint, mixed with something metallic, blood, maybe. You don't have to explain, I said softly. She turned to me, tears hanging at the edge of her lashes. Please, Celestine. Don't do anything. I just need this to be quiet. If it gets out, he'll lose everything. And it'll be my fault. I reached out, took her hand gently. Her skin was cold, fragile like old paper. You're not the one breaking things, Narina. She shook her head. You don't know him when he's angry. It's easier if I just keep him calm. She stayed the night. I made up the couch, gave her a blanket. We didn't talk much after that. The next morning, she was gone before I woke. A note on the table read, "Thank you. Please, let it go." But letting go wasn't peace anymore. It was surrender. 3 days later, I was leaving the grocery store when I felt it, the weight of someone watching. The parking lot was half empty, the air thick with the smell of rain on concrete. I turned, and there he was. Deacon. He leaned against his car like he owned the ground it sat on. Clean uniform, sleeves rolled up, that same easy smile that fooled everyone else. Afternoon, Celestine, he said, voice calm, almost friendly. Deacon. You know, I've been thinking about you, he continued, stepping closer. You care a lot about family. That's admirable. But sometimes caring means minding your own business. I didn't move. You mean staying quiet? He smiled. I mean knowing when to stop. I'm letting this go. Once. Don't make me regret it. His tone was smooth, like honey poured over knives. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, sterile, controlled. There won't be a next time, he said softly, almost tenderly. I looked straight at him. There's always a next time. That's your problem. He straightened, smirk fading just enough to reveal the crack beneath it. Be careful what you start, Celestine. You won't like how it ends. I lifted my phone, pressed the camera button, and snapped a photo of his license plate before he could react. His eyes flicked to the screen, then back to mine. I walked away without another word. My hands didn't shake until I reached the car. I sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. The truth was, I wasn't scared of him anymore. I was scared of how much I wasn't. That night, I opened my laptop. The glow lit the room in sharp blue light. I downloaded an encryption app, created a folder, and titled it, "If Anything Happens to Me." Inside, I dropped the photo, copies of the notes I'd taken, a picture of the camera from Narina's kitchen, and the text messages she'd sent over the past few months. Each one read like a plea she didn't mean to send. I wrote a short note at the end: "He thinks I'm alone. He's wrong." I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence again, steady and low, like a pulse reminding me I was still here. I thought about Mom and how she'd call this obsession, about Narina who would beg me to stop. I thought about Deacon, how easily he switched faces. The husband. The officer. The liar. The line between those roles was thin, but I had finally found where it broke. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to stand on it. I walked to the window, the city light smudging the horizon in soft golden gray. Somewhere out there, he probably thought he still controlled the story. But the story had already shifted. Quietly, slowly, I whispered into the glass, "You can't erase what I see." The reflection staring back looked tired, older, but certain. I closed the blinds, locked the door, and let the night settle around me like armor. Morning sunlight broke through the blinds in thin lines, slicing across the kitchen floor of my apartment. I hadn't slept, just drifted in and out of restless thoughts. I couldn't shake the image of his face in that parking lot, how calm he looked, how sure. People like him always believed they were untouchable, as if the world bent for their convenience. By evening, I found myself back at Narina's. I told myself I was dropping off Unia's forgotten jacket, but that was a lie I barely believed. The air smelled faintly of smoke. Not the comforting kind, not wood or candles, but paper, burnt paper, acrid and stale. She stood in the kitchen, hair undone, shoulders slumped. The sink was full of gray water, ash swirling like dirty snow. "What happened?" I asked softly. She didn't turn around. "He found the papers," she said. Her voice cracked, then steadied. "The doctor's report. The photos. All of it." I moved closer. "He burned them?" "He said they were lies." She laughed, the sound small and jagged. "He said I made it all up to embarrass him." Her hands gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. "He said if I ever try again, he'll make sure no one believes me next time either." I wanted to tell her we could start over, that I'd find copies somehow, but she looked so fragile, so hollowed out, I couldn't force the words. "Sit down," I whispered gently. "You don't have to talk right now." She shook her head. "I can't sit. If I stop moving, I'll think. And if I think, I'll break." Later that night, back in my apartment, my phone buzzed against the table. A text. Unknown number. "You're playing a dangerous game. Back off." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then another message: "This is your last warning." The number disappeared after that. I didn't reply. I didn't sleep either. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the city blink in and out of focus. Fear used to make me small, now it just made me steady. Quietly, I promised myself, I'm not backing off. The next night, it was close to midnight when I went to check on Narina again. Her house was dark except for a thin strip of light under the kitchen door. I let myself in. Bags sat by the front door, 2 suitcases, 1 small backpack. Narina stood there in her coat, Unia beside her clutching a stuffed rabbit. "I'm taking her and leaving," Narina said before I could speak. "We can't stay here anymore." Her voice trembled with exhaustion, not fear. I stepped between her and the door. "Run where?" I asked gently. "Anywhere. Wisconsin maybe. I'll find a job. I'll change our names if I have to." "You think that'll stop him?" She looked up sharply. "What do you want me to do, Celestine? Wait around for him to kill me?" Her words cut through the air like glass shattering. Unia flinched. I lowered my voice. "He's a police officer. You can't outrun that kind of power. You'll have to face it. But not alone." Narina's shoulders sagged. The defiance in her eyes dimmed into something quieter, acceptance or defeat, I couldn't tell. She crouched to Unia's level, brushed her hair back. "Go upstairs, sweetheart. Aunt Celestine and I need to talk." After Unia left, Narina turned to me. "I don't think you understand. There's no winning this." I stepped closer. "Then we'll stop playing by his rules." She laughed again, but softer this time. "You always think you can fix things." "Maybe not," I said. "But I can stop pretending." We stood there in the kitchen, the air between us filled with the smell of burnt paper and desperation. I thought of the words I'd written in that notebook, if anything happens to me. The idea of waiting for something to happen felt unbearable. Finally, she whispered, "I'm tired, Celestine. I just want it to stop." I touched her arm, gentle and slow. "Then let's make it stop." Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I saw the sister I used to know, the one who believed we could fix anything by holding on tight enough. Then she looked away. I stayed until she fell asleep on the couch, her hands still clutching her car keys. Unia had curled up on the armchair, her stuffed rabbit pressed to her chest. I covered them both with a blanket before locking the front door. Outside, the night was cold and clear. My phone buzzed again, another message from an unknown number: "You can't protect everyone." I deleted it without reading further. By the time dawn came, I was back at my place. I poured coffee and watched the steam curl upward, thin and ghost-like. I thought about all the women who ran, who hid, who changed their names and hoped time would erase the danger. But danger didn't forget. It lingered. It waited. Later that afternoon, Narina called. Her voice was small. "He came by the school today. He didn't say anything. Just stood across the street watching." I closed my eyes. "Take Unia home. Lock the doors. I'll come over." When I arrived, the air in her house felt charged, like a storm about to break. She met me at the door, pale and shaking. "He said if I leave, he'll ruin you too." I swallowed hard. He already tried. We sat together in silence until Unia came down the stairs, rubbing her eyes. She climbed into my lap and whispered, "Is Daddy gonna find us?" Her question hung in the air, heavy and trembling. I cupped her face, leveled my eyes with hers. "Not if I find him first," I said quietly. She nodded, trusting me the way only children can. Narina's gaze met mine over her daughter's head, fear, gratitude, and a kind of surrender that made my chest ache. I stayed until they both fell asleep again. Then I stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. I could almost feel him out there, waiting for me to break. But I wasn't the same woman who used to be afraid of silence. I breathed slowly, gently. I'd learned the kind of patience that frightens men who mistake stillness for weakness. The line had been drawn. And this time, it was mine. The morning after I drew the line, rain began to fall again. It wasn't the hard, punishing kind that slams against windows. It was steady and patient, like the sky was whispering a warning I'd already decided to ignore. I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, my laptop open, wires snaking across the rug. A small black USB drive pulsed faintly beside me, its light the only heartbeat in the quiet room. I had no plan, just a pull, a certainty that waiting would cost more than acting. So, I began collecting. Every morning for a week, I drove to Narina's house. I told her I was helping her organize, rearrange closets, go through old boxes. She believed me because she wanted to. She needed to. Each time, I brought something small, a new candle, a set of dish towels, a little recording device the size of a matchbox. I hid one under the dining table, another behind the bookshelf, one near the hallway camera Deacon thought only he controlled. I moved like someone folding a secret into fabric, one that could later be unfolded thread by thread. At night, I listened. Deacon's voice filled the headphones. Calm, measured. Always explaining, always correcting. Narina's responses were quiet, her tone careful. You could hear the pause before every answer, as if she was testing each word for landmines. And then there were the smaller sounds, the ones that hurt more. Unia's muffled crying. A chair scraped across tile. A long silence where no one dared breathe. I learned how to hear fear without needing to see it. He doesn't even see me, Narina said once. But he talks like I'm not real. I named the recordings with dates. I encrypted everything, copied files twice, saved them on hidden drives. The work became its own rhythm. It kept my mind from drifting into panic. One afternoon, while helping her in the attic, I found a dusty plastic box marked Christmas. It looked untouched for years. Inside were tangled lights, old ornaments, and at the very bottom, a discarded hard drive from a home security system. The brand matched the one Deacon had once bragged about installing for safety. I took it home, cleaned the dust off with the sleeve of my sweater, and plugged it into my laptop. The screen blinked, static flickering for a moment before footage appeared. The timestamp read 2 months ago. The living room filled the frame. Deacon. He was shouting, lips moving, hands cutting through the air like weapons. He grabbed Narina's arm, shook her once, hard enough that the camera jolted. A plate shattered on the floor. She flinched backward, hands up, eyes closed. His face twisted as he leaned close to her, voice low but clear through the built-in mic. "No one's ever going to believe you." The words hit harder than the image itself. I paused the video, my breath thin and fast. The timestamp. The date. The bruise she'd tried to hide that week. It all fit too perfectly. I sat still for a long time, watching the screen glow cold blue against my skin. Then I began to upload the file, fingers steady even though my heart wasn't. Each percentage that ticked upward felt like a pulse, a confirmation that silence was breaking. The next step was proof no one could deny: medical. Legal. Documented. I told Narina we were going to Oak Park for lunch. She smiled weakly, didn't ask why. I think she already knew. Dr. Hester Quinn's office was small but warm. She had gray hair pulled into a braid and eyes that didn't flinch at stories like ours. When Narina hesitated, Dr. Quinn spoke gently, "You don't owe me calm. Just truth." The exam was quiet, clinical. Bruises, old and new. Ribs tender to the touch. Hands trembling when asked to hold still. She wrote notes in careful, deliberate strokes. "This isn't just physical," Dr. Quinn said finally. "This is sustained trauma. Long-term. Ongoing." Narina nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. I could see her jaw working hard to keep from crying. Dr. Quinn printed the report, signed the bottom, and handed me 2 copies. "Keep one somewhere safe," she said. "And give the other to someone who'll make noise when you can't." I thanked her quietly. Narina couldn't speak at all. We drove back mostly in silence. The windshield wipers moved in slow arcs, keeping rhythm with the rain. At one stoplight, Narina whispered, "Do you ever wonder if it's too late to start over?" "Ik glanced here. Starting over isn't the same as running away." She nodded slowly, her reflection faint in the glass. "Then maybe I'll try starting over." That night, I sat at my table surrounded by fragments of evidence, recordings, photos, documents. Proof of harm turned into pages, names, and timestamps. I slipped the report and the USB drive into a manila folder, sealed it with tape, and labeled it in thick black ink. "If anything happens to me." The weight of those words settled deep in my chest. I found a lockbox, placed the folder inside, and slid it under my bed. My fingers lingered on the metal edge before closing it. For the first time, I realized what I'd done. I hadn't just gathered evidence, I'd declared war. And war always cost something. I sat there a long time, watching the rain trace lines down the window. The city beyond looked blurred, washed clean and dirted at the same time. Somewhere out there, he still thought he was in control. Somewhere out there, he was wrong. I whispered softly into the empty room, "It's not just her life on the line anymore. It's mine too." The sound of my own voice surprised me, steady, almost calm. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, letting the fear melt into something sharper. Resolve. Quietly, gently, I said it again. "It's mine too." I didn't sleep that night. The weight of what I'd gathered sat in the room with me like a third presence, unmoving, undeniable. I watched the sky change colors behind the blinds, from pitch black to navy to a pale gray blue, the kind that looks like it hasn't made up its mind yet. The world was waking up soft. I wasn't. At 6:42 a.m., I sat at my desk. The folder was thick now, overstuffed with names, dates, photographs, audio transcriptions, printouts of bruises measured in centimeters. I had opened the same document a dozen times, tweaking wording, removing anything that might read as emotion instead of evidence. There wasn't room for feelings anymore. Only facts. I typed the label. Block letters. No room for doubt, to Avery Lucent, Assistant United States Attorney, Federal Division. I slipped the folder into a manila envelope and sealed it tight with clear tape. No fingerprints. No return address. Just a weight in my hand that felt heavier than it should. Taped to the front, a single line I wrote in my own handwriting. "If you wait, someone will die. Possibly me." I drove straight to the post office and paid cash for Priority Express. I watched the clerk scan the label. He handed me a receipt. I didn't keep it. It rained again that afternoon. A soft drizzle that clung to the air like static. I sat by the window and waited, checking headlines, scrolling news, listening for footsteps outside my door. The world moved slowly, as if holding its breath. 72 hours later, it happened. I was pouring coffee when the first alert buzzed on my phone, breaking, federal probe launched into Chicago police misconduct. I froze. My hand hovered over the mug, the coffee cooling with each second. The next headline, sources confirm Varelli family under federal investigation. And another, 2004 cover-up allegation reopened, Clive Varelli named. I walked to the couch, phone in hand, and watched the press conference live. Behind the podium stood a woman in a navy suit, her tongue clipped, unreadable. What was once a golden family in blue is now under federal fire, she said. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat still, letting the words pass through me like smoke. The next day, the arrest came. I watched it unfold on my laptop, the footage grainy, but clear enough to catch the moment his smirk dropped. Deacon Mitchell, in full uniform, being led out of the precinct in handcuffs. Camera flashes popped like fireworks. Reporters shouted his name. He kept his eyes down, jaw tight. They asked him if he had anything to say. He didn't answer. Narina didn't want to see it. She turned off her phone and spent the day reading with Unia. But I recorded it. I saved the clip, backed it up 3 times. Then I watched it again. Not because I needed to see him fall, but because I needed to believe we were finally seen. The world wasn't fixed. There were still men like him. Still systems that protected them. But this one moment, this one fall? It was ours. That evening, I stood by the window, the sun warming my face through the glass. My breath came slow, even. He thought I'd be quiet forever, I whispered. And just then, a knock sounded at the door. It wasn't loud. Just one knock. Steady. I froze, every instinct going quiet. My hands curled reflexively. Then I walked to the door. Slowly. Calmly. I didn't open it right away. I pressed my ear to the wood. A voice came through, low and familiar. It's me, Narina said. I opened the door. She stood there in jeans and an old sweatshirt, no makeup, no mask. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. She stepped inside without asking. I saw it. Not live. Later. I just couldn't see it happen in real time. I nodded. You don't have to explain. We sat down across from each other at the table. A pause stretched between us, gentle and necessary. I wanted to say thank you, she said finally. But that doesn't cover it. You did what I couldn't. I reached for her hand. She let me. You were surviving, I said. I was watching. That's different. Narina exhaled slowly. I feel like I'm breathing for the first time in years. It's strange. I keep waiting for the floor to fall out from under me. It won't, I said. Not this time. Outside, kids rode bikes in the street. Dogs barked in the distance. Life went on. But inside this room, something had shifted. Not just between us, but inside us. Narina stood. You know, she said, he told me once that if I ever left, I'd end up alone. That nobody would believe me. That I was forgettable. Her voice didn't shake. Well, I said, he was wrong. She looked down at me and smiled, not the tight, practiced kind. A real one. I think I want to tell my story, she said. When I'm ready. I nodded. Whenever you are. She walked to the door, paused. You burned the bridge, didn't you? I had to, I said. I couldn't let him walk back across it. She left. And I stood there, holding the echo of her words like a thread. Softly, I closed the door behind her. The house was quiet when Narina left, the kind of quiet that lingers long after the door closes. I stood for a while in the hallway, watching dust float through a slant of morning light. It was strange how ordinary everything looked, how peace could look like stillness and still not feel like safety. 2 days later, the courthouse was on every news station. Reporters lined the marble steps, microphones glinting like small weapons. I didn't go there to make a statement or to be seen. I went because I needed to know the truth was still moving even when I wasn't the one pushing it. I stood across the street from the courthouse, coffee cooling in my hand. The flag above barely moved in the wind. People filed in, faces solemn, expectant. Some looked curious, others hungry for scandal. None of them knew what it had cost to get here. When I finally stepped closer, I caught my reflection in the courthouse glass doors. I barely recognized her, the woman who used to apologize before speaking. The woman who thought silence was safer than truth. She was gone. Inside, security buzzed and murmurs echoed through the hall. The air smelled like coffee and old paper, like secrets kept too long. I didn't go inside the courtroom. I waited in the hallway, leaning against the wall, listening. Narina's voice drifted through the open door. Soft. Shaky. But hers. He said if I left, he'd destroy me, she told the judge. He didn't know I wouldn't be the one alone this time. Every word landed like a heartbeat. I could imagine her standing there, hands clasped, shoulders squared, finally looking someone in the eye without lowering her gaze. A reporter passed by, whispering into her phone, Varelli family falls apart. Wife testifies. Daughter protected. I closed my eyes, just for a moment. The weight I'd carried so long shifted, just slightly, enough for me to breathe. Later, I sat in my car and turned on the radio. That's when I heard it, Mom's voice. I believed in the wrong man, she said to the reporter. And I didn't believe my own daughter. The interviewer asked if she regretted defending him. There was a pause, long enough to tell the truth without words. Yes, she said quietly. But some apologies come too late. I pulled over, gripping the steering wheel. For years, I'd imagined that kind of acknowledgement from her, simple, clean, human. Now that it had come, it felt like a whisper through a closed window. I couldn't open it, couldn't go back. That night, I went to see her. She was sitting in her armchair, the television muted, the flicker of headlines flashing across her face. You didn't have to come, she said, eyes fixed on the screen. I know. We sat in silence for a while, the air thick with things we wouldn't say. You hate me, don't you? She asked finally. I looked at her. No, I said softly. I just stopped waiting for you to see me. She turned then, her mouth tightening, her eyes wet. You think you know everything, Celestine. But you don't know what it's like to watch your family collapse and realize you built it wrong. I wanted to tell her I did know. That I'd been rebuilding the pieces she ignored. But instead, I said, then start building it right. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The next morning, the headlines changed again. Raylan Breck suspended, internal texts reveal systemic corruption. His name was everywhere. The department issued statements about accountability, integrity, reform. The same words they always used when the rot finally reached daylight. I read the texts, let it slide. He's got family upstairs. It wasn't just one man. It never is. I sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper spread open, tracing the printed letters with my fingertip. The world finally saw what we'd known all along, monsters were badges, and cowards hold their silence for them. I thought about Deacon's father, Clive, who'd built his legacy on loyalty and cover-ups. They called it a dynasty once. Now it was a cautionary tale. Later that afternoon, I met Narina outside the courthouse. The air was cool, clouds rolling in from the lake. She was holding Unia's hand. The little girl wore a red coat, bright against the gray concrete. The doors opened behind us. A few reporters followed, shouting questions that Narina ignored. She stopped on the steps and turned to me. It's over, she said quietly. I shook my head. No. It's just begun. Now you live. She exhaled, long and shaky, then laughed. A small sound, but real. I forgot what that feels like. Unia ran ahead, spinning in the open space, her laughter carrying higher than the wind. For the first time in months, Narina didn't flinch. When we walked to the car, she squeezed my hand. We didn't win everything, she said. But we stopped the bleeding. Her words sank deep, gentle but certain. Healing never feels like victory, it feels like survival made visible. That evening, I watched the sunset from my balcony. The city glowed gold, washed clean by the storm. On the news, they played a clip of Deacon being escorted into a courtroom, head bowed, cuffs on his wrists. For a moment, I saw his face as it had been when I first met him, charming, polished, all light. Now it was just a man stripped of illusion. I turned off the television and stood in the quiet. No fireworks. No triumph. Just peace settling in the cracks. Softly, I said it aloud, to no one but myself, we didn't win everything. But we stopped the bleeding. And for the first time, I didn't tremble. The sun rose softly that day, spilling warmth across the floorboards of my kitchen, reaching into corners that had long felt forgotten. The windows were open. For once, not because I needed fresh air to push something out, but because it simply felt right to let light in. I sat at the table, sipping coffee that had gone cold, not because I was distracted, but because I didn't mind. The stillness wasn't heavy anymore. It didn't press against me like silence used to. It rested. Across town, Narina was unpacking. Her new apartment sat above a little bakery, the kind that smells like cinnamon and start-overs. I'd spent the last 3 afternoons helping her hang curtains, build Unia's new bed, and tape tiny glow-in-the-dark stars onto her ceiling. We didn't talk about the past. Not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't need to explain itself anymore. Unia laughed louder now, without looking over her shoulder first. That alone was enough. On Tuesday, a delivery came. A bouquet of white lilies in a simple glass vase. No note. Just a silence heavy with meaning. I didn't have to ask who it was from. The flowers said everything she wouldn't. Regret is a strange thing, it doesn't arrive like guilt. It arrives like a quiet guest, uninvited, but too familiar to ignore. I didn't call Maris. I didn't send a thank you. Regret isn't love. It's just quieter. The next week, the sentence was handed down. 15 years. No parole for 10. Charges: domestic battery, coercion, destruction of evidence, obstruction. I didn't watch the footage. I read the headline once and closed the tab. I didn't need to see his face again. I already knew what it looked like when someone realized they weren't untouchable anymore. Instead, I walked to the back of my closet and pulled out the lockbox. The one I'd labeled "if anything happens to me." I sat on the floor and opened it slowly. Inside were all the pieces of the war I never wanted to fight: flash drives, photographs, transcripts, that doctor's report with Narina's name at the top in bold letters. My hands hovered over them for a moment. Not trembling. Just still. Then I reached for the folder, opened it, and pressed delete. One file at a time. Quietly. Intentionally. Not because it was over. But because I wasn't afraid anymore. The power wasn't in the folder. It had never been. It was in the fact that I could now choose what I kept and what I let go of. Some stories don't end with slamming doors or last-minute confessions. Some just soften. That evening, I walked by the lake. The wind rolled off the water in gentle gusts, tugging my hair loose. I didn't fight it. I watched the ripples move across the surface, circles expanding outward, slowly fading but never quite disappearing. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd buried trying to keep the peace. The daughter who swallowed her voice. The sister who stood on the sidelines. The woman who waited too long to be heard. They were still part of me. But they weren't all of me. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering with clarity, without letting the memory define you. It means standing in the wind without flinching. It means knowing I was never the broken one. Just the one brave enough to stop pretending. Sometimes the loudest kind of bravery is the quiet choice to not flinch, to not run, and to not let fear rewrite your story. What about you? Have you ever kept silent just to keep the peace? If this story moved something in you, don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-the-bone stories like this one. We're just getting started. The sun rose slowly that day, without urgency, without fanfare. It spilled across the worn floorboards of my kitchen like it had done 1,000 mornings before, only this time it didn't feel like intrusion. It felt like permission. The light reached into the corners I used to avoid, those spaces behind the trash can, beside the refrigerator, near the chipped paint beneath the window ledge. Places that had, for too long, gathered dust and silence. But this morning, the windows were open. Not to air something out. Not to push anything away. Just to let the day in. And that was new. I sat at the kitchen table, one hand cradling a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Not because I forgot. Not because I was lost in thought. But because I didn't mind. The stillness didn't wrap around me like a warning anymore. It didn't press against my lungs like it used to. That feeling of waiting for the next thing to break. It rested. And so did I. Across town, Narina was unpacking boxes in her new apartment above a small bakery that smelled like cinnamon and things beginning again. The scent crept up the stairs and lingered in the hallway like a promise. I'd spent the last few afternoons helping her settle in, hanging curtains, assembling Unia's new twin bed, sticking glow-in-the-dark stars onto the ceiling one by one until the little girl squealed in delight. We didn't talk much about the past. Not out of avoidance. But because it didn't need to be decoded anymore. It simply was. And we were still here. Unia laughed more now, loud, unfiltered, the kind of laugh that bounces off walls and makes strangers smile. And she didn't look over her shoulder when she did it. That alone made everything worth it. A few days later, a delivery arrived at my door. A tall glass vase filled with white lilies, soft, open, and fragrant. No note. No signature. Just the flowers, placed gently on my porch, like a whisper left behind by someone who still didn't know how to speak. I didn't have to ask who sent them. The silence that wrapped around the gesture said more than words ever could. Regret doesn't ring the doorbell. It slips in quietly. Uninvited. But familiar. I didn't call Maris. I didn't text. I didn't send thanks. Because regret is not love. It's just the shadow of it. The following week, the sentence was handed down. 15 years. No parole for 10. Charges listed in black and white. Domestic battery. Coercion. Destruction of evidence. Obstruction. I didn't watch the trial. Didn't play the footage. Didn't click the viral video link that everyone whispered about. I read the headline once. And closed the tab. Because I didn't need to see his face again. I had already memorized what it looked like when a man who believed he was untouchable finally realized he wasn't. Instead, I walked to the back of my closet. Pulled down the lockbox. The one I had labeled. If anything happens to me. It was covered in dust. Not from neglect, but because I hadn't needed it in a while. I sat on the floor, legs crossed, back against the closet wall. The air was still, the carpet cool beneath me. I opened the box slowly. Inside were the pieces of a war I never asked to fight. Old flash drives. Photos no one else had copies of. Screenshots of texts no one ever believed. Transcripts from depositions. A printed report with Narina's name at the top, bold, undeniable. I stared at them. Not with fear. Not with grief. Just with a quiet awareness that I was finally free to choose. My hand hovered for a moment. Then reached for the laptop. I opened the folder. And one file at a time, I hit delete. Not frantically. Not dramatically. Deliberately. Intentionally. Because the power was never in the documents. It wasn't in the evidence or the timestamps or the words of the doctor. It was in the fact that I could now choose what to keep. And what I no longer needed to carry. Some endings don't arrive with slammed doors or last-minute screams. Some just soften. Like paper worn at the edges. That evening, I walked by the lake. The wind carried just enough chill to tug strands of hair loose from my braid. I didn't reach up to fix them. I let them move. The water was still in places, restless in others. The surface danced with ripples, rings that spread wide, disappearing slowly into the wider hole. I thought about every version of me that had once lived in this skin. The girl who kept her head down. The daughter who didn't speak until spoken to. The sister who stepped aside. The woman who mistook tolerance for love. They were all still inside me. But they weren't steering anymore. Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering clearly, without letting memory dictate the present. It's being able to sit beside the ghosts and not let them speak louder than you do. It's walking in the wind without flinching. It's knowing you don't need someone's permission to name what hurt you. It's this. Waking up and letting the light in, not because you're chasing hope. But because you already have it. That night, I sat back at the kitchen table. A new mug of tea beside me. A blank page open in my journal. I wrote, simply. I was never broken. Just the only one brave enough to stop pretending I wasn't. I closed the journal. Exhaled. Long and full. Sometimes, the bravest thing isn't confrontation. It's stillness. It's choosing not to run. Not to beg. Not to prove. Not anymore. Because I'm not living in defense of myself. I'm living. So, what about you? Have you ever kept quiet, just to keep the peace? And if you have, did you ever wonder what it might feel like to stop? If this story stirred something in you, if it brushed against an old silence you've been carrying, stick around. Subscribe. Because we're not done. We're just getting started.